Tonight, we are entering one of the most unsettling stories in the book of 1 Samuel, the day Israel carried the Ark of the Covenant into battle, believing victory would follow, and lost it anyway. The question at the heart of this story is simple, but deeply disturbing. How could Israel bring its most sacred object, the sign of God's covenant presence, onto the battlefield and still suffer one of the darkest defeats in its history? This is not only a story about war, it is not only about soldiers, enemies, or a sacred object falling into foreign hands. It is the story of a people who reached for the holiest thing they knew when fear closed around them, but who may have failed to face what had already gone wrong beneath the surface. The Ark of the Covenant was not an ordinary chest. In the biblical story, it was bound to Israel's covenant with the Lord, the holy relationship that marked them as His people. It belonged near the center of worship. It carried memory, command, promise, and the weight of divine presence. To Israel, the Ark was not decoration. It was a sign that their story was not held together by kings, armies, or walls, but by the God who had called them. But in 1 Samuel 4, that sacred object is taken from Shiloh, the place where it was kept, and brought into a war camp. Israel is facing the Philistines, a powerful enemy from the coastal plain, a people who will trouble Israel again and again through the books of Samuel. The first battle has already gone badly. Men have fallen. The camp is shaken. Fear has entered. So Israel sends for the Ark. At first, everything seems to change. When the Ark enters the camp, the army erupts with a shout so great that the ground seems to tremble. Across the battlefield, the Philistines hear the sound and panic. For one brief moment, it feels as if the story has turned. The holy object has arrived. The enemy is afraid. The defeat seems ready to become a victory. But the biblical story moves towards something far darker. By the end of the day, thousands of Israelites will be dead. The sons of Eli, the old priest of Shiloh, will fall in battle. The Ark itself will be captured by the Philistines. A messenger will run back to Shiloh with torn clothes and dust on his head. Eli will hear the news and die beside the gate, and in the shadow of disaster. A child will be born and given a name that sounds like a wound. ICHABOD. Because the glory has departed from Israel. So this is the story of a battle they thought God would win for them. But beneath the smoke, the fear, and the sound of armies, another story is unfolding. It is the story of what happens when people carry a holy symbol close to them, while the truth behind that symbol has already been pushed away. The story begins with Israel camped near a place called Ebenezer, while the Philistines are gathered at Aphek. The names come to us from an ancient world of ridges, valleys, roads, and military fear. On one side stands Israel, the people of the covenant. On the other stands the Philistine army, disciplined, dangerous, and close enough to threaten the fragile life of Israel's tribes. The biblical text does not slow down to explain the entire political world. It brings us straight into the pressure of battle. Israel goes out to fight, and the Philistines strike them down. About 4,000 men fall in the field. When the survivors return to the camp, they do not only bring wounds, blood, and broken weapons. They bring a question. Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? It is a frightening question because it is not foolish. Israel knows its story is tied to the Lord. Their battles are not merely contests of iron and muscle. They are a people shaped by covenant, memory, and divine command. If they have fallen before their enemies, then the defeat feels larger than a military failure. It feels like something in the unseen order has gone wrong. But the most important part of the scene is what happens next. The elders do not wait for a prophet. The text does not show them turning inward, searching for hidden sin, or asking whether the defeat is exposing a deeper corruption. They do not remain long inside the question. Instead, they decide to bring the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh into the camp, so that it may go with them and save them from their enemies. At first glance, the decision may sound like faith. A frightened people reach toward the sacred. A wounded army calls for the sign of God's presence. The elders want the ark near the soldiers, near the battle line, near the place where fear has become impossible to ignore. But the silence around the decision is heavy. No command from the Lord is recorded. No prophet speaks. No divine instruction sends the ark into battle. Israel acts, and the story lets the action stand there in the dust, full of hope on the surface and danger underneath. The ark was sacred, but it was not a weapon Israel could lift whenever courage failed. It was not a charm that forced heaven to serve the plans of frightened men in the biblical imagination. Holy things are never safe when people begin to treat them as tools. The ark could be carried by human hands, but the presence of God could not be controlled by human fear. And there is another shadow behind this decision. The ark will come from Shiloh, the place of worship where Eli serves as priest. Eli is old, and his house is already under a dark word of warning. Earlier in 1 Samuel, the biblical text describes his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, as corrupt priests who dishonor the sacrifices and treat sacred responsibility with contempt. That detail changes the whole movement of the story. The problem is not only out on the battlefield. Something has already been wounded in the place of worship. The sanctuary itself has carried a hidden sickness. So when the elders call for the ark, the audience is meant to feel more than relief. The sacred object is about to leave Shiloh, but Shiloh is not whole. Israel wants the ark to answer the question raised by defeat, but the question may be deeper than they are willing to face. Why did they fall before the Philistines? Why did the Lord allow the battle to turn against them? What had been ignored long before the first sword was raised? The ark is about to enter the camp. The soldiers will shout. Hope will rise like fire in dry grass. But beneath that rising sound, the story has already begun to warn us. The first defeat was not the end of the danger. It was the beginning of revelation. From Shiloh, the ark is brought toward the battlefield. We can imagine the road under a pale sky, the dust lifting around the feet of those who carry it, the camp waiting in tense expectation. To Israel, this is not the movement of an ordinary object. It is the movement of memory itself. The ark is tied to the covenant, the sacred bond between the Lord and his people. The biblical text speaks of it as the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord Almighty, enthroned between the cherubim. For a listener unfamiliar with the image, the cherubim were heavenly figures connected with the holy presence of God. The Ark stood at the heart of Israel's sacred imagination, pointing to the God who had delivered them, commanded them, and dwelt among them in holiness. But now the Ark is not in the quiet of worship. It is moving toward the noise of war. It is not surrounded by incense, prayer, and reverent silence. It is entering a camp still shaken by defeat, where men are hungry for courage and desperate for a sign that the next battle will not end like the first. When the Ark arrives, Israel does not fall silent. The entire camp erupts. The shout rises so fiercely that the earth seems to shake. Soldiers who had just faced humiliation now feel strength return to their bodies. Men who had seen death in the field now lift their voices as if victory has already stepped into the camp with the Ark. It is a magnificent sound, but also a dangerous one. The shout is the sound of fear turning into confidence too quickly. It is the sound of a people mistaking a rival for assurance. The Ark is with them now, and that seems to be enough. Their voices fill the camp, but the story gives us no word from the Lord. The earth trembles beneath the sound of men, while heaven remains silent. Then the narrator adds the detail that darkens the scene. Hophni and Phinehas are there with the Ark. They are priests, sons of Eli, men who should have stood as guardians of holy things. But the earlier chapters of 1 Samuel have already shown them as men who treated their priestly office with contempt. They were close to sacred duties, yet their lives had become signs of corruption. So the Ark enters the camp, and Israel shouts as if glory has arrived. But beside the Ark stand men who remind us that something in the holy place has already been defiled. The battlefield and the sanctuary are no longer separate. What was broken in Shiloh has now followed Israel into war. Many of the soldiers may not understand this. They may only see the Ark and feel relief. They may remember stories of deliverance, old memories of Egypt, wilderness, and the Lord's mighty hand. They may believe, sincerely and desperately, that the God of their fathers has come near to rescue them again. That is what makes the scene so human. Their hope is not hard to understand. Defeated people reach for what they trust. Afraid people want something visible. When the world becomes unstable, the heart looks for something it can hold, something it can point to, something that says, "We are not alone." But the Ark is not something Israel can use to bypass the truth. The symbol is near, but nearness to a holy symbol is not the same as faithfulness to the holy God. The camp is full of noise, but the unresolved question from the first defeat still waits beneath it. Across the battlefield, the Philistines hear the roar. They ask what this great shout in the Hebrew camp means. Then they learn that the Ark of the Lord has come into the camp, and fear moves through their ranks. Their fear is not empty. They know enough of Israel's story to be terrified. They speak of the divine power that struck Egypt. Although their words show they understand Israel's God through the confusion of outsiders, to them, the arrival of the Ark means that a dreadful power has entered the field. The battle has become more than a battle. This is where the suspense tightens. Israel is shouting. The Philistines are afraid. The sacred object has entered the camp. Every visible sign seems to lean toward Israel's recovery. But the visible signs are not the whole truth. The ark has arrived, but the danger has come with it. The Philistines are afraid, but they do not run. Fear moves through them, then hardens into resolve. They tell one another to be strong. They remember what it would mean to be defeated by the Hebrews. They imagine servitude, humiliation, and the loss of power. So instead of breaking, they brace themselves. This is the great reversal at the center of the chapter. Israel believes the arrival of the ark has changed the battlefield. In one sense, it has. The enemy has heard. The enemy has trembled. The enemy knows that something sacred to Israel has entered the camp. But fear does not make the Philistines collapse. It makes them fight harder. Now both armies stand inside misunderstanding. Israel treats the ark as if its presence guarantees victory. The Philistines react as if the ark is a terrifying power that must be resisted with desperate courage. Each side sees the sacred through the pressure of war. Each side reacts to the symbol. But neither side controls what is truly unfolding. The second battle begins under the shadow of that misunderstanding. Israel has shouted. The Philistines have answered with determination. Dust rises again from the field. Men run forward. Weapons strike. The hopeful sound that filled the camp is swallowed by the violence of combat. And then the battle turns. The biblical text does not linger over individual duels or heroic speeches. It moves with terrible simplicity. The Philistines fight. Israel is defeated. The men of Israel flee, each to his own tent. The slaughter is very great. 30,000 foot soldiers fall. The number feels almost unbearable after the first defeat. Earlier, 4,000 had died, and that loss was enough to shake the elders into action. Now, after the ark has been brought into the camp, the loss becomes far greater. The object they thought would reverse the disaster has been present at a deeper disaster. Then comes the sentence that changes everything. The ark of God was captured. For Israel, those words would have landed like darkness falling in the middle of the day. The ark, the sign of covenant presence, the sacred object brought out as their hope, is now in enemy hands. The thing they believed would keep them from defeat has become part of the defeat itself. Hophni and Phinehas also die that day. Their deaths matter because they are not only two men lost in war, they are the sons of Eli, priests of Shiloh, men whose corruption had already been named earlier. A word of judgment had warned that both sons would die on the same day. Now that word reaches its fulfillment on the battlefield. The collapse is no longer only military. The battlefield has become the place where the hidden disorder of the sanctuary is exposed. The sons who mishandled holy service fall beside the ark they accompanied. The army that shouted around the sacred object scatters. The enemy takes what Israel thought could never be taken. Here, the story must be held carefully. It is not saying that the Lord has been defeated by the Philistines. It is not saying that God has become weak because the ark has been captured. Later, in the chapters that follow, the ark will become a terror in Philistine territory. But for Israel, in this moment, the capture is devastating because it reveals how deeply they had misunderstood the symbol they carried. The ark could be lifted onto shoulders. It could be moved from Shiloh to the camp. It could stand in the middle of the army while men shouted around it. But it could not be forced to cover corruption. It could not be used to turn fear into faith. It could not make a broken people whole simply by being placed near their weapons. By the end of the battle, Israel has lost what it brought to protect itself. The field is scattered with the dead. The survivors flee toward their tents. The Philistines have taken the ark. Hophni and Phinehas lie among the fallen, and somewhere beyond the battlefield, Shiloh still waits without knowing what has happened. The war is over for the soldiers who have died, but the grief is only beginning for those who must hear the news. Someone must run back. Someone must carry the collapse home. A man from the tribe of Benjamin runs from the battlefield to Shiloh. The biblical text does not give him a name, but it gives him an image strong enough to carry the scene. His clothes are torn, and dust is on his head before he speaks. Grief is already visible on his body. The road to Shiloh becomes a road of dread. Behind him lies the battlefield, the scattered dead, the broken army, the captured ark. Ahead of him lies the city where the ark had once rested, where Eli still waits, where families do not yet know that the disaster has already crossed into their lives. When the messenger enters Shiloh, the city cries out. The sound rises through the streets, sharp and confused. Eli hears the noise from where he sits beside the road. He is old now, heavy, nearly blind, and the text tells us that his heart trembles for the ark of God. That detail is filled with sorrow. Eli has sons in the battle, but the story tells us his heart trembles for the ark. He knows what has gone out from Shiloh. He knows the weight of what has been risked. Perhaps he knows, in some quiet place within himself, that the house he failed to restrain has moved too close to judgment. Eli's eyes are dim, and he cannot see. The image is more than physical. He sits at the edge of the road like the last figure of a fading era. A priest who has served for years, a judge who has watched over Israel, and a father whose sons have dishonored the holy place. Now he waits in darkness for a messenger covered in dust. The man tells him what happened. Israel fled before the Philistines. There was a great slaughter among the people. Hophni and Phinehas are dead. Each report is heavy, but the final word carries the deepest blow. The ark of God has been captured. When Eli hears about the ark, he falls backward from his seat beside the gate. His neck breaks, and he dies. The biblical text does not soften the moment. It does not give him a final speech. It lets the fall speak for itself. This is one of the most haunting turns in the chapter. Eli hears of the army's defeat. He hears that his sons are dead. But the story marks his collapse when the ark is named. The capture of the ark means something beyond personal grief. It is the visible sign that the center has been torn open. The old priest falls, and with him an age seems to fall. His sons are dead. His house is broken. The warning spoken earlier in the story has come to pass. The place of worship that should have guarded holiness is now filled with the sound of loss. Still, the chapter does not end with Eli. It moves into an even quieter room, away from the public cry of the city and into the body of one woman. She is the wife of Phinehas. The text does not preserve her name, but it preserves her grief. She hears that the ark has been captured, that her father-in-law is dead, and that her husband is dead. She is pregnant, and when the news reaches her, labor comes upon her. The disaster has now traveled from battlefield to city gate to birth chamber. It is no longer only counted in the fallen soldiers. It is no longer only spoken by a messenger. It has entered breath, pain, blood, and the fragile edge between life and death. Around her, women try to comfort her. They tell her not to be afraid because she has given birth to a son in another story. Those words might open a door of hope. A son could mean continuity. A son could mean that the line has not ended. A son could mean that even after death, life still answers. But she does not receive the child that way. The joy of birth cannot rise above the weight of what has happened. The child has entered the world, but the world he enters has been marked by the capture of the ark. The ark was taken. Eli is dead. Hophni and Phinehas are dead. Shiloh is crying. And now the last word of the chapter must be spoken by a dying mother. The wife of Phinehas gives birth in the shadow of disaster. The women near her speak the words that should bring comfort. Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son. They are trying to call her back toward life, toward the child, toward the fragile hope that birth usually brings. But she does not answer. The text says she does not respond or pay attention. Her mind is fixed somewhere beyond the room, beyond the child's first cry, beyond her own pain. She has heard the news, and the news has taken the shape of a whole world collapsing. She names the boy Ichabod. The biblical text explains the name. The glory has departed from Israel. She says this because the ark of God has been captured, and because of the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband. Yet again, the ark stands at the center of the grief. The deaths matter. The broken family matters. But the capture of the ark gives the disaster its deepest meaning. A birth should open the future. A child should arrive like a small flame against the dark. But this child receives a name shaped by loss. His first breath is joined to the memory of a defeated army, a dead priestly house, and the sacred ark carried away by enemies. The woman does not explain everything. She does not turn the moment into a lesson. She speaks a name, and the name carries the weight of the chapter. Ichabod becomes a living witness to the day Israel lost more than it could count. The word glory here carries more than honor or beauty in Israel's story. Glory is connected with the weight of God's presence, the sense that the Lord is among his people. When she says the glory has departed, she is naming the terror beneath the military defeat. Israel has not only lost soldiers, it has not only lost priests, it has lost the visible sign that made them feel the holy presence was still at the center. But even here, the story does not mean that God has ceased to be God. It does not mean the Philistines have conquered the Lord. The biblical narrative will soon show that the ark is not helpless in enemy territory. The Philistines may take it, but they cannot master the God whose presence it represents. For Israel, however, this moment feels like abandonment. It feels like emptiness at the center of the people. The ark is gone. The shout in the camp has faded. The men who brought it out are dead. The old priest has fallen. And a child now carries a name that tells the truth no one can avoid. That is why the ending is so severe. The chapter does not close with Philistine celebration. It does not follow the ark into enemy territory yet. It remains in Israel, in the place of grief, in the room where life and death meet. The final image is not a warrior, a king, or a priest. It is a newborn child and a dying mother's words. ICHABOD. The glory has departed from Israel. The name gathers the whole story into one wound. At the beginning, Israel asked why the Lord had defeated them before the Philistines. They did not wait long inside that question. They reached for the ark. They brought the sacred object close. They shouted until the ground trembled. But by the end, the question has returned with greater force. What if the first defeat was not merely a problem to be solved, but a warning to be heard? What if the ark was not absent because it needed to be moved, but because Israel needed to face what had gone wrong in its own midst? What if the real danger was never only the Philistine army? The child born after the glory left becomes the last image of 1 Samuel 4. Not victory, not rescue, not an easy answer. A child, a name, and the silence after false confidence breaks. The story leaves us there because the silence matters. It wants us to feel the distance between the shout of the camp and the whisper of the name. It wants us to remember that sacred things can be near, while the heart remains far away. It wants us to see that the holy cannot be carried into battle as a substitute for truth. Israel took the ark into battle and still lost it. But by the time the ark was captured, something deeper had already been exposed. The glory had departed. So what was really lost that day? Israel lost a battle, but the story is not satisfied with counting the dead. Israel lost the ark, but the story is not merely about a sacred object changing hands. Israel lost Hophni and Phinehas, and Eli died when the news reached him. But even that does not exhaust the meaning of the chapter. What was lost was an illusion. At the beginning, Israel thought the problem was that the ark was not in the camp. If they could bring it closer, fear would end. If the sacred object stood among the soldiers, the enemy would fall. If the symbol arrived, victory would return. And the ark did come. The people shouted. The enemy trembled. Every visible sign seemed to say that Israel had found the answer. Still, Israel fell. That is what makes 1 Samuel 4 so haunting. It does not treat the ark as empty. It does not say holy things are meaningless. It shows something more disturbing, that sacred things cannot be used to escape the truth. The ark could be carried from Shiloh to the battlefield, but it could not be turned into a guarantee. It could not repair what Israel refused to face. The final word belongs not to a commander, not to a victorious enemy, and not even to Eli. It belongs to a woman dying in the shadow of loss. She names her son ICHABOD because the glory has departed from Israel. That name does not mean God has become weak. It does not mean the Philistines have defeated the Lord. It means Israel has reached a moment where the sign of divine presence has been taken from their midst. and the people must feel the emptiness they tried to cover with noise. And perhaps that is why this ancient story still feels so powerful. It asks how close people can stand to sacred things and still fails to listen. It asks how loudly they can shout around a holy symbol and still misunderstand holiness. It asks how much can be lost before the truth finally becomes impossible to avoid. The ark was taken into battle, and Israel still lost it. But the deeper loss began before the battle, in the corruption left unhealed, in the warning left unanswered, and in the hope that a sacred object could do what only a return to truth could do. The story ends quietly, with a dead priest, a grieving city, a captured ark, and a child named after departed glory. The shout has faded from the camp. The road to Shiloh is covered in dust, and in the silence that follows, Israel is left with the truth it had tried not to see. The holy cannot be carried as a weapon. The presence of God cannot be controlled by fear, and glory, once taken for granted, can leave behind a silence deeper than defeat.